Hate thrives in the shadows, feeding on fear and silence. But one quiet morning in a suburban park, that darkness collided with a force it couldn't comprehend. What began as a group of racists targeting a black man and his dog turned into the unraveling of a network built on terror. The gang assumed their numbers and cruelty would be enough. They were wrong. Hunter Pierce was no ordinary man. A retired Army sniper, he carried with him years of training, an unshakable resolve, and a loyalty forged with his fiercely intelligent shepherd, Shadow. The gang saw only a solitary figure, someone they believed they could bully into submission. But their attempt at domination would spark a chain of events that would dismantle their operations and expose the system protecting them. This isn't just a story about one man's skills in combat or the loyalty of his companion. It's about a quiet but unstoppable force standing against hatred, a community finding its courage, and the justice that comes when fear meets its match. By the time the dust settled, those who thought they could intimidate their way to power would find themselves brought to their knees. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The suburban park was alive with the sounds of morning serenity. Children's laughter echoed from the playground, mingling with the rhythmic hum of joggers' footfalls and the melodic bird song that floated through the crisp air. Sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the winding paths with patches of golden light and shadow. Hunter Pierce walked steadily along the trail, Shadow at his side. The German shepherd moved with a calm confidence, his ears alert but not tense, his sleek coat shimmering under the sun's rays. His nose twitched with interest at every passing scent. A squirrel's recent dash, the earthy musk of damp leaves, and the lingering traces of picnics from the day before. For Hunter, these morning walks were more than a routine. They were a sanctuary. In a world that often teetered on the edge of chaos, this hour offered a reprieve, a chance to clear his mind and feel connected to something beyond himself. He relished the simplicity of it all, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the warm leather leash in his hand, and the steady companionship of Shadow. As they rounded a gentle curve in the trail, Hunter noticed a group of men gathered by a bench under a sprawling oak. They lounged in the shade, their laughter harsh and discordant against the otherwise tranquil backdrop. One of them, a stocky man with a leather jacket slung lazily over his shoulders, gestured toward Hunter and leaned in to murmur something to his companions. Whatever he said elicited sharp, mocking laughter that sliced through the air like a jagged edge. Hunter's steps remained measured, his expression carefully neutral, though he could feel the weight of their gazes trailing him. Their voices dropped into hushed whispers, punctuated by bursts of sneering laughter. Shadow's ears twitched, his sharp instincts sensing the tension, but a quiet command from Hunter kept him steady at his side. This wasn't the first time Hunter had encountered hostility like this, and he knew better than to engage. "Hey!" The stocky man's voice rang out, loud and grating, cutting through the distance between them. "I'm talking to you." Hunter slowed to a stop as the man stepped onto the trail, blocking his path. "You deaf or something?" the man added with a smirk, his tone dripping with derision. Hunter met his gaze, his expression calm yet unyielding. "Morning," he said evenly, his voice steady, betraying no hint of unease. The man sneered, his lips curling into something that resembled a smile, but felt far more menacing. "Yeah, real nice morning," he drawled, his tone mocking. "But see, this here's our park. You're a little out of place, don't you think?" The words hung in the air, laced with a quiet threat. Shadow shifted slightly, his muscles taut, as if anticipating Hunter's next move. One of the others, a wiry man with tattoos climbing up his neck like ivy, rose from the bench and spat on the ground. His movements were deliberate, intended to draw attention. "He doesn't look like he's lost, does he? Maybe he's just stupid." His voice carried a sneer, each word sharp enough to cut. The group closed ranks slightly, their movements subtle but intentional, tightening the invisible noose around Hunter. Their laughter carried a note of menace, a dissonance that clashed with the morning's peace. The air seemed heavier now, tinged with the acrid scent of hostility. You think you can just stroll through here like you own the place? The leader said, stepping closer. His leather jacket creaked faintly as he moved, the weight of the chain in his hand glinting in the sunlight. People like you don't belong here. Never have, never will. Hunter remained still, his posture calm but alert, like a coiled spring. His gaze met the man's without wavering. I don't want any trouble, he said, his voice measured and firm. Just out for a walk. The leader chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, you don't want trouble? He mocked, his tone dripping with derision. Too bad, because it looks like you just found some. Beside him, Shadow let out a low, warning growl. The sound was quiet, but carried an unmistakable edge, a primal warning that sent a ripple through the tension. Hunter gently tapped Shadow's side, a silent command to hold steady. His heart thudded in his chest, but his face betrayed nothing. The leader smirked, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the length of a heavy chain. He let it dangle menacingly, its links clinking softly with an ominous rhythm. See, this is our turf. You either turn around now or, well, maybe we teach you a lesson you won't forget. The wiry man grinned and produced a small pocket knife, flicking it open with a flourish. Its blade glinted in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the park's serene backdrop. Better yet, he said with a twisted smile. Maybe we teach your mutt a lesson too. Hunter's jaw tightened, his grip on Shadow's leash firm. His mind raced, assessing the situation with practiced precision. You don't want to do this, he said quietly, his voice calm but laced with steel. His words were a warning, not a plea, carrying a weight that made the men hesitate, if only for a moment. The leader tilted his head, studying Hunter as if weighing the risk against the reward. Oh, I think we do, he said, stepping forward, the chain swinging slightly in his hand. The park seemed to hold its breath, the once cheerful sounds of morning now distant, muffled by the tension crackling in the air. Shadow tensed, his eyes locked on the group, ready to act at a moment's notice. Hunter stood his ground, a storm of determination brewing behind his calm exterior. The men only laughed, their circle tightening as they loomed closer. Their sneers grew sharper, their postures bolder, feeding off one another's hostility. Hunter knew the moment for words was slipping away, but he held his ground, his mind calculating every move, every escape route. Their taunts grew louder, the venom in their voices sharp and deliberate, aimed to provoke. You've got guts, the leader said, letting the chain in his hand dangle with deliberate menace, its metallic clinking adding to the growing tension. But you've got no clue who you're dealing with. You think you can just stroll through our park? Like it's nothing? Like you belong here? Hunter's eyes didn't waver. He tilted his head slightly, his expression neutral but unyielding. I wasn't aware parks had owners, he replied evenly. You got a deed for this place I didn't see? The leader's scowl deepened, his expression twisting into something uglier. Don't get smart with me, old man, he snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. People like you're the reason everything's falling apart. You come in, take what's ours, act like you're better than us. Hunter's gaze sharpened, his stance remaining steady. People like me, he repeated, his tone still calm but laced with an edge. What exactly does that mean? Go ahead. Spell it out. The wiry man with the tattoos stepped forward, his movements deliberate as he spat on the ground near Hunter's boots. His lips curled into a sneer. You know damn well what he means, he said, his voice low and filled with disdain. You don't belong here. You people think you can move in, push us out, and then what? Take everything? Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating like a low rumble of thunder. The dog's stance mirrored Hunter's, a quiet but unmistakable warning that they were prepared, no matter the odds. Hunter's fingers flexed slightly on the leash, his body taut with restrained energy. He didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of the wiry man's words hang in the charged air between them. The moment stretched, the world narrowing to just the six of them, the tension growing thicker with every breath. Hunter's brow furrowed slightly, but his voice remained calm. Everything? What exactly do you think I'm taking? A walk through the park? A patch of grass you haven't touched since last summer? Don't act dumb, the wiry man snapped, his voice sharp with anger. You move into our neighborhoods. Your kids take over our schools. Before long, we're the ones who have to leave, and you're the ones living easy. The leader sneered, stepping closer, the chain in his hand swinging lazily but purposefully. Yeah. And then you call us the problem. But we're not the ones who can't keep to our own side of the fence. Hunter's jaw tightened, though his face betrayed little else. And who built the fence? He asked, his voice steady but cutting. Who decided there even needed to be a side? You? Your father? Some guy who told you the world owes you everything as long as you can keep everyone else out? For a brief moment, the leader's smirk faltered. His eyes flickered with something, uncertainty, maybe even shame, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He recovered with a sneer. Don't turn this around on me. You don't know anything about us. Then tell me, Hunter said, his tone hardening. What's so terrifying about someone walking through a park? Is it me you hate? Or are you just so scared of losing something you never earned in the first place? The wiry man bristled, his hand gripping the knife tighter, his knuckles whitening with the strain. You've got a big mouth for someone outnumbered 6-1. Hunter's eyes flicked to the knife, noting the trembling in the wiry man's hand before returning his gaze to his face. I've faced worse odds, believe me. The leader chuckled, though the sound was cold and hollow. Oh, you're one of those, huh? Think you're tough. Think you've got it all figured out. Let me tell you something. We've been here since the beginning. This is our town, our park, our rules. You think you can just come in here and act like you're one of us? You're nothing. Hunter took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes boring into the leader's, his voice lowering but gaining a quiet intensity that made even the leader hesitate. You keep saying our, like you own the air, the dirt, the trees, but you don't. You're just scared kids trying to hold on to something that was never yours to begin with, the wiry man snarled, his composure slipping further. Shut up! You don't know a damn thing about us. Hunter's gaze locked on him, unflinching and steady. His voice dropped to a razor's edge, calm but commanding. I know you're not half as tough as you want me to think. That's why there's 6 of you and 1 of me. That's why you need a chain and a knife, and I just need my dog. Shadow let out a low, steady growl, his eyes trained on the wiry man. The growl wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the gang hesitate. Hunter stood firm, the leash slack but ready in his hand, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the simmering chaos in the air. The tension hung heavy, unspoken challenges passing between them like sparks, each side waiting to see who would make the first move. The leader's face darkened, his grip tightening on the chain until the metal links groaned under the strain. You really don't know when to shut up, do you? His voice was low and venomous, each word dripping with hostility. Hunter's voice dropped to match, calm yet razor-sharp. I know when to speak. I know when to act. And I know when to warn people before they make a mistake they'll regret. Shadow let out another low growl, the sound rippling through the tense air like distant thunder. The gang exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado flickering, if only for a moment. But the leader stepped forward again, anger flaring in his eyes, unwilling to let his authority waver. His movements were sharp, deliberate, each step an attempt to reassert control. You think you can scare us? The leader spat, his voice rising. We've dealt with plenty of guys like you. You're nothing special. Hunter's gaze held steady, unflinching. I don't need to scare you. You're already scared. That's why you're here, trying so hard to prove something to yourselves. But you're about to cross a line you can't walk back from. The leader's face twisted into a sneer, his anger bubbling over. You don't get to tell us what to do. Boys, let's show him what happens when someone steps out of line. The gang moved as one, their circle tightening until the space between them and Hunter was suffocating. The tension was palpable, crackling like a live wire ready to snap. Shadow's growl deepened, his entire body coiled like a spring, his sharp eyes darting between the advancing men. Hunter remained motionless, his focus trained on the leader, his instincts sharpening as he braced for the inevitable. Without warning, the leader lashed out, the chain slicing through the air with a sharp whistle. Hunter raised his forearm just in time to block, the metal striking his skin with a sting that sent a jolt of pain shooting through his arm. The force of the blow knocked him back a step, but he didn't falter. Before he could fully recover, the wiry man lunged at him, the glint of a knife flashing in the sunlight. His movements were wild but fast, driven by adrenaline and desperation. Hunter pivoted, narrowly avoiding the blade, and grabbed the man's wrist in one fluid motion. With a sharp twist, he forced the knife free, the weapon clattering to the ground with a dull thud. But the victory was short-lived. As he turned, the hulking man charged at him like a freight train, all brute strength and no finesse. Hunter barely had time to brace before the impact drove him to the ground. The force knocked the air from his lungs as he hit the dirt, the hulking man pinning him down with his weight. A triumphant sneer spread across the man's face, his breath hot and labored, his victory seeming assured as the gang closed in tighter. "You're done now!" the hulking man growled, his voice a guttural snarl as he raised his massive fist to strike. His weight pinned Hunter to the ground, his shadow looming like a thundercloud. Another attacker, wielding a rusted metal pipe, moved in with grim determination. Behind him, the wiry man scrambled frantically to recover his knife from where it had fallen moments before. Shadow barked furiously, the sharp staccato sound echoing through the park like a war drum. The dog darted around the group, his movements quick and purposeful, but one of the gang members swung wildly at him with a stick, keeping him at bay. Pinned beneath the hulking man's weight, Hunter gritted his teeth, his mind racing even as the odds stacked higher against him. Years of training surged to the forefront of his thoughts, screaming for calm and clarity. He couldn't overpower them in sheer strength. It wasn't a fight he could win head-on. He needed to be smarter, to use their aggression and overconfidence against them. "Shadow!" Hunter gasped, his voice sharp and commanding. "Circle!" At the word, Shadow instantly veered wide, darting in a fast, deliberate arc. The man with the metal pipe turned his attention to the dog, his focus splintering for just a moment. That moment was all Hunter needed. Hunter shifted his weight, using the hulking man's size against him. With a sudden, powerful buck of his hips, he threw the man off balance, just enough to create a sliver of space. With his free hand, Hunter grabbed a fistful of dirt from the ground and flung it into the man's face. The hulking man roared in pain, clutching at his eyes as he reeled back. Seizing the opportunity, Hunter rolled out from under him and sprang to his feet. His breaths came quick, but his movements were sharp, deliberate. The wiry man charged again, knife flashing as he slashed wildly, rage overtaking any sense of precision. Hunter sidestepped the attack, grabbed the man's arm, and twisted hard. The knife slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground. Without hesitation, Hunter drove his knee into the wiry man's stomach, doubling him over and sending him sprawling to the dirt. The leader's chain lashed out again, this time wrapping tightly around Hunter's shin. The sudden yank pulled him off balance, and he dropped to one knee. The leader advanced, rage etched into his face. "You're not getting out of this," the leader snarled, raising the chain for another strike. Hunter didn't panic. His gaze flicked to the knife lying nearby, the one he'd forced from the wiry man's hand earlier. In a swift motion, he reached for it and caught it just in time. As the chain came down, Hunter deflected it with the knife's hilt and yanked hard, pulling the leader forward. Hunter surged upward, driving his shoulder into the leader's chest with unrelenting force. The impact sent the leader stumbling backward, his footing lost and his momentum broken. "You should have walked away," Hunter said, his voice cold and steady as he stepped forward, deliberate and unyielding. The man with the pipe, seeing Hunter regain ground, let out a guttural roar and charged recklessly. Hunter waited, his stance steady and calm, his body coiled like a spring. At the last possible second, he stepped aside, his movements deliberate and precise. Using the man's own momentum against him, Hunter caught the attacker's arm, twisted sharply, and wrenched the pipe free. With a fluid motion, he flipped the man onto his back, sending him crashing to the ground. The pipe clattered against the dirt with a metallic clang, a hollow echo of the man's groans of pain. Shadow, alert and relentless, circled back and targeted the hulking man, who was still wiping dirt from his eyes, cursing under his breath. With a powerful leap, Shadow clamped his jaws onto the man's arm, dragging him down with the force of his attack. The hulking man howled in pain, thrashing wildly as he tried in vain to shake the dog off. "Get this damn dog off me!" he bellowed, his voice raw with desperation. "Shadow, release!" Hunter barked, his tone commanding and sharp. Shadow immediately obeyed, releasing his grip and retreating to his master's side, his growl low and menacing. The hulking man cradled his bleeding arm, his bravado all but gone as he staggered on the ground. The leader, now clutching his ribs and panting heavily, scanned the scene with a growing sense of panic. His once confident smirk had been replaced by a grimace of pain and disbelief. Two of his men had already begun retreating, dragging the wiry man, still doubled over and gasping, away from the fray. "Don't run, you cowards!" the leader barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his rage. But the fleeing men didn't stop. Their fear outweighing their loyalty, Hunter stepped forward, his posture strong and unyielding, his piercing gaze fixed on the leader. "You thought 6-on-1 would make this easy," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Guess you didn't count on needing 6 more." The leader spat blood onto the ground, his hand tightening around the chain as though it could somehow restore his control over the crumbling situation. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he snarled, his voice laced with bitterness. "You're just a dead man walking." "No," Hunter replied, his voice steady and cold. He took another step forward, closing the space between them. "I'm the reason you're walking away now instead of crawling." The hulking man, still clutching his injured arm and reeling from the pain, stumbled to his feet. His movements were slow and labored, his confidence shattered. "Boss, let's go," he muttered, his voice quiet and shaky. The remaining men glanced nervously between Hunter and the leader, their expressions a mix of fear, exhaustion, and defeat. "This isn't over. You don't know who you're dealing with," the leader hissed, his voice dripping with venom. His glare burned into Hunter, his chest heaving with frustration and defeat. Pointing a shaking finger at him, he spat out a final warning. "You'll regret this." Hunter's reply was calm but carried a lethal edge. "Not as much as you will." Shadow barked sharply, his teeth bared, and the leader flinched involuntarily, his tough demeanor faltering for a split second. Finally, the leader turned away, dragging the chain behind him with a hollow clinking sound. He followed the rest of his gang, who were already retreating down the trail. Their footsteps grew fainter and fainter until the sound melted into the ambient rustling of the park, leaving Hunter and Shadow alone in the clearing. Hunter exhaled slowly, the tension in his body easing slightly as he surveyed the aftermath. His hand rested on Shadow's head, the contact grounding him. "Good work, buddy," he murmured. Shadow licked his hand in response, his tail wagging faintly, though his posture remained alert, his ears perked and swiveling toward every distant noise. The park was eerily still now, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Scattered across the dirt path were the remnants of the confrontation: an abandoned pipe, a torn jacket, faint streaks of blood where the fight had played out. Hunter stood amidst the chaos, his chest rising and falling as he processed what had just happened. Shadow sat close by, his gaze fixed on the direction the gang had fled, his body still coiled like a spring, ready to act. Hunter winced as he felt the ache in his ribs and the sting in his forearm where the chain had struck him. The dull throb in his muscles reminded him of the physical toll the fight had taken, but he pushed the pain aside. There was no time to linger. He crouched near the spot where one of the attackers had dropped his backpack during the scuffle. It was old and battered, the fabric stained and frayed at the edges, the zipper partially undone as if it had been hastily abandoned. Hunter's eyes narrowed as he remembered the wiry man with the knife, the flash of fear in his eyes before he'd bolted, leaving everything behind. Hunter hesitated for a moment, scanning the surrounding area to ensure the gang hadn't circled back. Shadow let out a soft growl, his ears twitching, as if sharing his master's unease. Satisfied they were alone, Hunter pulled the backpack toward him, his movements deliberate. Whatever was inside, it might provide answers, or lead to more questions. Inside, Hunter found a tangled mess of items that told a chilling story. Crumpled papers, a cheap burner phone, and several cans of spray paint rattling at the bottom of the bag. He pulled out the phone first, flipping it open. Its screen was cracked, spiderwebbed with fractures, but it powered on. The lock screen displayed a flurry of missed messages, all from unknown numbers. Hunter scrolled through the texts, his brow furrowing as he read, "Next target confirmed. Same time tomorrow. Keep it quiet this time. Don't need cops sniffing around. Make sure the families know they aren't welcome." His grip on the phone tightened, the plastic creaking under the pressure of his hand. He didn't need to read further to grasp the scope of what he was dealing with. This wasn't a random act of violence born of boredom or anger. It was calculated, deliberate. A campaign of intimidation aimed at driving people out. Setting the phone aside, Hunter rifled through the papers next. Most were crude flyers scrawled with hateful slogans and symbols meant to incite fear, the kind of propaganda designed to cow and isolate communities. But one sheet stood out, a hand-drawn map of the park and surrounding neighborhoods. Red ink circled several houses, each marked with scribbled notes. Late-night delivery. New family. Warn them. Hunter's chest tightened as he studied the map. He recognized some of the addresses. Families who had recently moved into the area. Fresh starts etched onto their doorways. Families like his once had been, chasing hope and safety in a new place. Shadow whined softly beside him, nudging Hunter's arm with his wet nose. The dog's gaze was steady, almost questioning. "It's worse than I thought," Hunter murmured, rubbing Shadow's head absent-mindedly. "This isn't just a gang looking for trouble. They're trying to terrorize people. Push them out." Hunter rose to his feet, his eyes narrowing as they swept the horizon where the gang had vanished. The aches in his ribs and arm throbbed in time with his pulse, but he pushed the pain aside. It was unimportant. What mattered was stopping this, not just for those circled on the map, but for everyone who thought they could find peace here. He pocketed the phone and folded the map carefully before slipping it into the backpack. The weight of the evidence wasn't just physical. It pressed on him, a heavy reminder of the responsibility he now carried. These men weren't acting alone. They had a network, a plan, and the boldness to think they couldn't be stopped. But they hadn't planned for someone like him. As Hunter reached the edge of the trailhead, his car came into view, parked in the shadow of a tall oak. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dirt path, the once serene park now tinged with unease. He opened the car door, and Shadow hopped into the passenger seat, his tail brushing against the gear shift, his eyes fixed on Hunter, waiting for the next move. Hunter slid into the driver's seat, the map and phone resting on the console beside him. His mind churned with possibilities, a fire burning in his chest. The gang's threats, their plans, their confidence. It all boiled down to a simple belief. No one would stand up to them. They were wrong. Hunter sat behind the wheel, staring down at the phone in his hand. He scrolled through the messages again, reading each one more carefully, noting the timestamps and the patterns in the communication. It became increasingly clear that this wasn't a disorganized group of thugs. They operated in cells, coordinating across multiple areas. This wasn't just a local problem. It was bigger than he'd initially thought. A network built on fear and violence. His mind replayed the leader's parting words. "This isn't over. You don't know who you're dealing with." At the time, the words had sounded like desperate bravado, an attempt to salvage some control as they retreated. But now, as Hunter pieced together the gang's intent, those words carried a heavier meaning. These men were confident for a reason. They believed they were untouchable, their actions invisible in the shadows. Hunter's jaw tightened, his grip on the phone hardening. They were wrong. They'd crossed a line, and now they'd face the consequences. He placed the phone on the dashboard and reached for the map, unfolding it with care. The red circles and scribbled notes seemed to pulse under the dim cabin light, each mark representing a family or home now steeped in danger. Hunter's eyes lingered on the notes. New family, warn them, late-night delivery. These weren't just scare tactics. They were calculated moves designed to intimidate and drive people out. Time to make them regret it, Hunter muttered, his voice steady, the calm before a storm. He glanced at Shadow, whose head tilted slightly as if he understood the weight of those words. The dog's presence was grounding, his loyalty unwavering. Hunter shifted the car into drive, his eyes fixed on the empty street ahead. The engine rumbled softly as he pulled onto the quiet road. The suburban neighborhood bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. This was bigger than him. This was about the families marked on that map, the people too scared to speak out, and anyone else who had suffered in silence. As the car rolled forward, Hunter's determination solidified. He didn't know exactly how deep this would go or how far the network extended, but he was ready. These men had started this fight, and now it was his turn to finish it. The hum of the engine filled the quiet cabin, a steady sound that mirrored his focus. Shadow sat calmly in the passenger seat, his ears twitching with every passing noise. Occasionally, he turned to glance at Hunter, as if sensing the storm beneath his composed exterior. Hunter's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, his mind replaying the fight in the park. Every swing, every taunt, every hateful word hung heavy in his thoughts. He had defended himself, but the encounter had left a bitter taste. The evidence he'd uncovered gnawed at him. The map, the messages, the deliberate targeting of innocent families. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was methodical, intentional, and designed to sow fear. But fear worked both ways. They thought they could terrorize and walk away unchallenged. They hadn't counted on him. Yet, the weight of what came next pressed heavily on Hunter. He had seen enough in his years as an army sniper to know the difference between justice and vengeance. Justice was measured, deliberate, and served with restraint. Vengeance, on the other hand, was a wildfire, chaotic, driven by anger and pain, and often consuming those who pursued it. He had watched others fall into that spiral, and he had sworn to himself that he wouldn't follow the same path. A soft whine from Shadow broke through Hunter's thoughts. The German shepherd's head tilted, his sharp eyes fixed on his master with a look of quiet understanding. His tail wagged faintly, as if offering reassurance. "I know, boy," Hunter muttered, his voice low and steady. "This isn't just about me. It's about them, the families they're targeting, the ones they've already hurt." He let out a long breath, the tension in his chest easing slightly. Shadow leaned forward, resting his head on Hunter's arm, a grounding gesture that brought a small, fleeting sense of calm. The car rolled into the driveway, and Hunter turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. His small house sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall, swaying trees. This place had always been his refuge, a sanctuary away from the noise and chaos of the world. But tonight, the stillness only reminded him of the storm brewing inside him. Inside, Hunter methodically spread the evidence across his kitchen table. The battered map, the phone with its incriminating messages, and the hateful flyers. The crude slogans scrawled across the papers made his stomach twist with disgust. But his attention was drawn to the map, the red circles around houses, the scribbled notes marking them as targets. It all pointed to a coordinated effort to sow fear and division. Hunter stared at it for a long time, his mind turning over the possibilities. The soldier in him wanted to strike swiftly, dismantling the operation before it could escalate further. But the man who had left the military in search of peace hesitated. He knew the risks of going down this path. It wasn't just his life on the line. If he became a target, the people he cared about could be dragged into the crossfire. A nudge at his leg pulled him from his thoughts. Shadow, ever vigilant, pressed his head against Hunter's knee, his quiet presence a reminder of stability in the chaos. Hunter crouched down, running his hand over the dog's head, feeling the warmth and loyalty radiating from him. "You keep me grounded, don't you?" Hunter said softly. His voice carried a note of gratitude. "You remind me why I'm doing this. Not for revenge. Never for that. To stop them from doing it again. To protect the ones they think they can hurt." Shadow wagged his tail, leaning into Hunter's touch. The warmth and trust in the dog's presence calmed the storm in Hunter's chest, easing the tension knotting his muscles. For a brief moment, clarity returned. He'd act, but it would be on his terms. With precision, not rage. Justice, not vengeance. His choices would be calculated and deliberate, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what these men were trying to inflict. Meanwhile, across town, Darrell Kane sat in his dimly lit office, his expression carved from stone. His fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of his leather chair, the rhythmic tapping the only sound in the otherwise silent room. The flickering light from a cheap desk lamp cast jagged shadows on the walls, highlighting the hard lines of his face. Darrell was a man who thrived on control, who bent people and situations to his will. Tonight, however, that control had slipped through his fingers, leaving behind only frustration and fury. "What the hell happened?" Darrell barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. His piercing eyes darted between the two men standing before him. The hulking brute cradled his bandaged arm, and the wiry man nursed a swollen eye. Their usual bravado had evaporated, replaced by nervous fidgeting and uneasy silence. It was a setup, the wiry man stammered, his voice shaky as he stared at the floor. "We didn't know he'd fight back like that. The guy, he wasn't normal. He moved like he's been in a war or something." Darrell's fist came down hard on the desk, the sharp crack of wood making both men flinch. "You're telling me 6 of you couldn't handle one guy and his damn dog? What are we running here? A circus?" The hulking man shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his boss's glare. "Boss, it wasn't just him. That dog. It was like it knew what we were going to do before we did it. And the guy, he knew how to fight. Real trained. Military, maybe." Darrell leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing into slits as he processed the information. "Military," he muttered, rolling the word on his tongue like it was a bitter taste he couldn't spit out. His expression darkened, the implications clear. "You're telling me we've got a trained killer poking his nose where it doesn't belong?" "He's dangerous, boss," the wiry man added quickly, his voice trembling. "If he comes after us, he won't get the chance," Darrell snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. His voice dropped, cold and razor-sharp. "We don't wait for him to make the first move. We find him. We end this before it gets out of hand." The hulking man frowned, shifting uneasily. "You sure, boss? He already took us apart once." Darrell's glare froze him mid-sentence. "Do I look unsure to you?" he hissed. "Find out who he is, where he lives, everything. We send a message, not just to him, but to anyone else who thinks they can stand against us." The two men nodded reluctantly, their shoulders heavy with unease as they shuffled out of the room. The door closed with a faint creak, leaving Darrell alone in the dimly lit office. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, and steepled his fingers under his chin, his lips twisted into a grim smile, equal parts menace and anticipation. "You're not the only one who knows how to fight," he murmured to the empty room, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's see how good you really are." Back at Hunter's home, he stood in the quiet of his kitchen, staring down at the map spread across the table. The red circles and scribbled notes seemed to burn into his mind, each one a reminder of the danger that loomed over innocent families. He folded the map carefully, tucking it into his jacket. His eyes drifted down to Shadow, who sat patiently by his side, his steady gaze a mirror of Hunter's own determination. "We'll do this right," Hunter said quietly, running a hand over Shadow's head. "No one else gets hurt." The dog's ears flicked in acknowledgement, but his sharp eyes stayed locked on Hunter, as if understanding the weight of his master's resolve. Deep down, Hunter knew the fight was inevitable. No matter how precise or restrained he tried to be, the gang wouldn't let this go. The storm was coming. The morning fog clung to the narrow highway, curling like ghostly tendrils around the trees as Hunter's truck rumbled through the quiet town. Shadow sat alert in the passenger seat, his sharp ears perked as the truck passed rows of weathered buildings. On the dashboard sat the evidence from the gang's discarded bag: the map, the burner phone, and a crumpled list of names. One name stood out: Jimmy B. The messages on the phone described Jimmy as the gang's logistics man, the one responsible for moving supplies, scouting targets, and keeping their operation running smoothly. If Hunter could take him out of the equation, it would disrupt their network and send a message that they weren't as untouchable as they believed. Hunter parked his truck a few blocks away from a dingy bar on the outskirts of town. Its faded neon sign buzzed faintly in the misty morning, casting a pale blue glow over the gravel lot. Shadow's ears twitched as Hunter adjusted his jacket. "Stay," Hunter murmured, patting the dog's head. Shadow whined softly, his tail thumping once against the seat, but he obeyed, curling up and watching Hunter intently as he exited the truck. Hunter's boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way toward the bar, his every step measured and deliberate. Inside, the bar was dimly lit, the air thick with the stale scent of beer and cigarettes. A jukebox hummed faintly in the corner, barely audible over the low murmur of conversations. In a shadowed corner booth, Hunter spotted him: Jimmy B. The wiry man nursed a half-empty bottle of beer, his greasy hair clinging to his forehead. He had the look of someone who thrived in the shadows, his confidence bolstered by the sense that no one would dare challenge him here. Hunter strode to the booth, his presence commanding. Without a word, he slid into the seat across from Jimmy, whose posture stiffened immediately. The man's narrowed eyes darted to Hunter, his expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" Jimmy asked, his voice sharp and defensive. Hunter leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "The man you should have avoided," he said. "I know who you are, Jimmy, and I know what you're doing." Jimmy's hand twitched toward his jacket, but Hunter's own hand came to rest on the table, his movements slow and deliberate. His gaze didn't waver as he spoke, his tone low and firm. "You don't want to do that," Hunter warned, his voice carrying an unspoken promise. "I'm not here to waste time. You're going to tell me everything about the gang, who you report to, where you operate, and what your next move is." Jimmy scoffed, the sound forced, his unease showing in the way his eyes darted toward the door. "You got the wrong guy, pal. I don't know anything." Hunter reached into his jacket and pulled out the map he'd taken from the gang's discarded bag, slapping it onto the table. The circled addresses and scrawled notes stared up at Jimmy like accusations, and the blood drained from his face. "You recognize this, don't you?" Hunter pressed, his voice sharpening. "You're running out of lies, Jimmy." Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the bar door swung open with a sharp creak. Two men entered, their footsteps heavy and deliberate as their eyes locked onto the booth. They were gang muscle, broad, mean-looking, and clearly there to back Jimmy up. "Hey, Jimmy!" one of them called out, his voice carrying a low growl as he approached. "You good?" Jimmy's confidence returned in an instant, his posture relaxing as he leaned back in his seat, smirking. "I'm fine," he said, the sneer in his voice unmistakable. "Just explaining to this guy that he doesn't belong here." The two men flanked the booth, their presence towering and oppressive. One cracked his knuckles, the sound loud in the quiet bar. "You heard him," the other said, his tone flat but menacing. "Time for you to go." Hunter's eyes flicked between them, his sharp gaze assessing every detail. Their stances, the tension in their hands, and the telltale bulge of a concealed weapon under one man's jacket. He exhaled slowly, his voice remaining calm but gaining an edge of steel. "I'm not going anywhere," he said evenly, "but you've got two options. Sit down and keep quiet, or make a move and regret it." The knuckle-cracker sneered, pulling a knife from his pocket and flipping it open with practiced ease. "Wrong answer," he hissed. He lunged at Hunter, the blade aimed for his chest, but Hunter moved with lightning speed. He caught the man's wrist mid-strike and twisted sharply, forcing the knife to clatter to the floor. Before the man could recover, Hunter delivered a precise elbow to his temple, dropping him to the ground in a dazed heap. The second man's hand darted for the pistol under his jacket, but Hunter was already moving. Grabbing the beer bottle from the table, he smashed it against the man's hand with a sharp crack, sending the weapon flying across the room. The man recoiled in pain, but before he could react, Hunter pressed the jagged edge of the shattered bottle to his throat. "Stay down," Hunter growled, his voice low and dangerous, before shoving the man back into a nearby table. The table tipped over, and the man crumpled against it, groaning. Jimmy bolted from the booth in the chaos, scrambling for the exit like a cornered rat. "Shadow!" Hunter barked, his voice sharp. Outside, a single loud bark echoed through the mist, followed by Jimmy's terrified scream. Shadow's growl rumbled in the air, a menacing sound that sent shivers down the spine. Hunter stepped outside to see Shadow pinning Jimmy to the ground near the bar's door, his sharp teeth bared, a low growl vibrating in his chest. The wiry man was trembling, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Behind him, the man with the knife staggered to his feet, blood trickling down the side of his face. Desperate, he grabbed a chair and swung it wildly at Hunter. Hunter ducked, evading the swing with ease, and countered with a powerful kick to the man's knee. A sickening crack followed, and the man collapsed with a howl, clutching his leg as he writhed on the ground. Inside, the remaining patrons had frozen, their drinks forgotten as they stared at the scene in stunned silence. No one moved to intervene. Hunter didn't give them a second glance as he turned his attention back to Jimmy. He crouched in front of the pinned man, his icy gaze locking onto Jimmy's panicked eyes. Shadow growled, his teeth hovering inches from Jimmy's neck. "You're going to tell me everything," Hunter said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Or the next time you meet Shadow, he won't stop at your arm." Jimmy nodded frantically, his body trembling beneath Shadow's weight. Okay, I'll talk. We've got a stash house a few miles out, off Route 12. That's where we keep the supplies, guns, money, everything. And the leader?" Hunter pressed his tone like a blade against Jimmy's fear. "Daryl Kane," Jimmy blurted, his voice cracking. "He calls the shots. But you don't want to mess with him, man. He'll kill you." Hunter's expression didn't change. He stood, hauling Jimmy to his feet with little effort. "You're going to lead me there," he said coldly, his tone leaving no room for argument. As they drove toward the stash house, Jimmy sat in the passenger seat, nervously rattling off details about the operation, his voice trembling. Hunter's eyes stayed on the road, his grip firm on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, Shadow's alert gaze met Hunter's briefly, the dog's steady presence grounding him. "We've got a long way to go," Hunter muttered under his breath. Shadow let out a soft bark, his tail wagging faintly, as if to say he was ready. The dirt road ahead stretched out like a vein through the dense forest, winding its way deeper into isolation. Hunter's truck moved steadily along the uneven terrain, the sound of crunching gravel, the only accompaniment to Jimmy's nervous chatter. The burner phone and map sat on the dashboard, their incriminating contents etched into Hunter's memory. Shadow remained alert in the back seat, his ears twitching at the faint rustle of leaves outside. "How much farther to the stash house?" Hunter asked, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. Jimmy hesitated, licking his lips as his gaze darted around. "Just a couple more miles. There's a turnoff up ahead," he replied, his words hurried. Hunter nodded, but the knot of unease in his chest tightened. Jimmy's fidgeting wasn't just fear. It was something else, expectation. Shadow growled softly, pressing his nose against the window, his body tensing. "What is it, boy?" Hunter muttered, his eyes scanning the road and the trees lining its edge. Then he saw it. A faint flicker of light through the foliage. A reflection. The telltale glint of a sniper's scope. Hunter's jaw clenched. Without hesitation, he slammed the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt on the gravel road. "Down!" he barked to Shadow as he threw the vehicle into reverse. The dog ducked immediately, and in the same moment, gunfire erupted. A loud crack shattered the air, followed by the splintering sound of the windshield exploding inward. Shards of glass sprayed across the cab, glittering in the dim light. Jimmy screamed, his hands flying over his head as he ducked low in the seat. "They're here! They're here!" he yelled, his voice panicked and shrill. Hunter didn't flinch. His eyes stayed sharp, scanning for cover as he maneuvered the truck in reverse, the roar of gunfire and Shadow's low growl filling the cabin. This wasn't just a setup. It was an ambush. Hunter backed the truck into the cover of a small embankment, throwing it into park with a decisive yank. "Stay in the truck," he ordered sharply, his tone brooking no argument. He reached behind the seat and grabbed his rifle. Shadow whined softly, but obeyed, crouching low in the back seat, his sharp eyes fixed on Hunter as if waiting for further instructions. Hunter exited the vehicle low and fast, keeping his profile minimized as gunfire erupted around him. The attackers were using suppressing fire, trying to keep him pinned down. Through the chaos, his trained eye quickly picked out their positions. 3 shooters spread out in the tree line ahead, one perched on the ridge to his left, and another circling wide on foot. "They've boxed us in," Hunter muttered under his breath, sliding the bolt of his rifle into place. Years of sniper training took over, his breathing slowing as he focused. The noise, the chaos, even the pounding of his own heart faded into the background. Using the truck as cover, he scanned the ridge where he'd seen the glint earlier. Through his scope, he spotted the sniper lying prone, his rifle trained on the truck. Hunter exhaled slowly, his world narrowing to the crosshairs. With a single sharp crack, he fired. The sniper's body jerked, his rifle slipping from his hands before he went still. The attackers faltered, rattled by the sudden precision. "He's got a rifle!" one of them shouted, their voices tense and muffled by the cover of the trees. Hunter didn't wait for them to regroup. Staying low, he moved along the embankment, circling to gain a better vantage point. He climbed a slight incline, which gave him a clearer view of the tree line. Through his scope, he spotted another shooter leaning out from behind a tree. The man fired a few erratic shots toward the truck, oblivious to Hunter's new position. Hunter exhaled again, steady and controlled. Another sharp crack. The man crumpled to the ground, his weapon falling from his grasp. A sharp bark from Shadow alerted Hunter to movement on the right. Adjusting quickly, Hunter spotted an attacker attempting to flank him, the man's weapon raised. Hunter shifted his aim and fired, the shot striking the man in the leg. The attacker screamed, collapsing as he clutched his thigh. "Regroup!" a voice barked from deeper in the woods, panic edging the order. The remaining shooters hesitated, their confidence visibly shaken. Hunter took advantage of the lull, retreating further up the incline to gain a higher position. He reloaded with practiced efficiency, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Through the scope, he spotted 2 figures advancing cautiously toward the truck, one of them shouting for Jimmy. Hunter's jaw tightened. They were trying to extract their man. Not on his watch. Jimmy, emboldened by the sight of his gang approaching, threw open the truck door and bolted. "They're here! Over here!" he yelled, waving his arms frantically as he sprinted toward the advancing men. Hunter clenched his jaw, a curse slipping under his breath. He shifted his rifle, tracking the 2 men moving toward Jimmy. He fired a warning shot, the bullet kicking up dirt at their feet. The sudden impact made them stop in their tracks, their confidence faltering. One of the men raised his weapon, firing blindly toward Hunter's position in the trees. The shots cracked through the air, splintering bark and tearing through leaves, but Hunter stayed low and moved laterally, keeping his position unpredictable. He lined up his next shot and fired. The bullet struck the man's rifle, sending it spinning from his grasp. The shooter stumbled back, swearing loudly as he clutched his now empty hands. Shadow seized the opening, leaping from the truck with a burst of speed. His powerful strides carried him toward Jimmy, intercepting him just as another gang member reached for his arm. With a ferocious lunge, Shadow clamped his jaws around the man's leg, dragging him to the ground as the man cried out in pain. "Shadow! Back!" Hunter's sharp voice cut through the chaos. Shadow immediately obeyed, releasing the man and retreating toward the truck. His growl reverberated through the clearing, a low warning that kept the gang at bay. The gang's leader, a tall man with a rifle slung over his shoulder, stepped forward, barking orders. "Pull back! We've got Jimmy! Let's go!" His voice carried a note of frustration as he waved for the others to retreat. Hunter's scope tracked the leader, locking onto his imposing frame. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the scope, the leader's expression dark with fury. "This isn't over, old man," he shouted, before turning and retreating into the woods with the rest of his men. Hunter stayed still, his finger lightly resting on the trigger. He considered taking another shot, but the moment passed. The fight was over, for now. He climbed down from his vantage point and made his way back to the truck. Shadow trotted to meet him, his tail wagging faintly despite the tension still thick in the air. Hunter knelt, placing a hand on the dog's head. "Good work, buddy," he murmured, his voice calm despite the chaos they'd just faced. His gaze swept over the bloodstains and spent shell casings scattered across the ground. The ambush had been calculated, and while they'd managed to take Jimmy, they'd grossly underestimated him. He'd shown them a fraction of what he was capable of, and he wouldn't let them walk away so easily next time. Climbing into the truck, Hunter started the engine, his mind already focused on his next move. The gang had escalated this fight, and now it was his turn to take the offensive. The diner smelled of grease and coffee, the faint hum of conversation blending with the clink of dishes. Its worn vinyl booths and flickering neon sign gave it a weathered charm. Hunter Pierce sat in a corner booth, his back to the wall, his untouched coffee cooling in front of him. Shadow lay under the table, his ears twitching at every noise, his sharp eyes scanning for threats. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows, blurring the neon reflections on the wet asphalt. Hunter's mind replayed the ambush, the calculated precision, the coordination of their movements. The gang hadn't been careless. Their priority had been retrieving Jimmy B, and they had come prepared to take him out if necessary. It wasn't just a fight anymore, it was a war. And the scattered pieces Hunter had gathered so far hinted at something far larger and more dangerous than a local gang. He needed to figure out his next move. And fast. The bell above the diner door jingled, pulling him from his thoughts. Hunter's instincts flared instantly. His posture remained relaxed, but his eyes flicked toward the door. A woman in a worn leather jacket stepped inside, shaking the rain off her shoulders. She carried a battered satchel slung over one shoulder and moved with a quiet but deliberate confidence. Her sharp gaze swept the room quickly before settling on him. For a brief moment she hesitated, then walked directly toward his booth. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice calm but direct, nodding toward the seat across from him. Hunter studied her carefully. She didn't look like a threat, no overt aggression in her body language, but appearances could be deceiving. Shadow shifted under the table, letting out a low, barely audible growl. Hunter didn't look away from the woman. "Depends," he said evenly. "What do you want?" She smirked faintly and slid into the seat without waiting for an answer. "I'm Tanya Walker," she said, leaning back slightly as if to put him at ease. "Freelance journalist. And if you're who I think you are, we need to talk." Hunter leaned back in his seat, keeping his expression neutral. "I think you've got the wrong guy." "I don't," Tanya replied, her tone confident. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper, placing it on the table and sliding it toward him. "Fight at the park. Ambush on Route 12. You've been busy." Hunter didn't glance at the paper, his gaze fixed on her. "If you're a journalist, you should know better than to poke your nose where it doesn't belong." Tanya shrugged, her demeanor unfazed. Maybe, but I've been following the Black Vipers for over a year, and you're the first person to make them bleed. That makes you interesting. Hunter's jaw tightened, his gaze finally dropping to the paper Tanya had slid across the table. The headline read, "Gang Violence Escalates in Suburbs." He scanned the article quickly, taking in the broad strokes. It was vague, with few details, clearly written without a full picture of the events. Whoever had penned it hadn't connected him to the incidents. At least, not yet. "What do you want?" Hunter asked again, his voice sharper this time, cutting through the din of the diner. Tanya leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if to shield their conversation from prying ears. "I've been digging into the Vipers' operations for months. They're not just a gang. They're a network. Organized, well-funded, and dangerous. They've got money, connections, and enough leverage to bury anyone who crosses them. I've gathered intel, but I can't do anything with it on my own." Hunter's expression didn't change. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "You want me to take your intel and do your dirty work?" "Something like that," Tanya admitted, her tone calm, almost casual. "Look, I've tried going public twice. Both times the stories were killed before they even hit the papers. These guys have their claws in everything: law enforcement, politics, even local businesses. If you think you're just dealing with street thugs, you're not. They're bigger than that." Hunter studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes searching for cracks in her story. What she was saying made sense. The ambush had been too coordinated, too deliberate, but trusting someone he didn't know wasn't his way. "You're asking a lot," Hunter said finally. His tone was neutral, but the weight of his words lingered. "What makes you think I won't just walk out of here and leave you to deal with this on your own?" Tanya's gaze didn't waver. "Because you've already made it personal," she replied, her voice steady, her confidence unshaken. "And because you're the kind of man who finishes what he starts." Reaching into her satchel, she pulled out a worn folder and placed it on the table between them. "This is what I've got," she said. "Names, financial records, property connections. It's not everything, but it's enough to start dismantling their operation." Hunter flipped open the folder, his eyes skimming the contents. One name immediately caught his attention: Detective James Greer. A handwritten note beside it read, "Potential ally. Investigating gang quietly, but isolated from department." "Who's Greer?" Hunter asked, his tone cautious but curious. "A detective in the next county over," Tanya explained. "He's been poking around the Vipers for months, but he's keeping it low profile. Either he's legit and working alone, or he's playing both sides. I haven't figured it out yet." Hunter closed the folder, his mind working through the implications. Greer could be an ally, or a threat. Either way, Hunter was beginning to see the outlines of a larger fight ahead. Hunter's expression remained unreadable as he closed the folder. "You're putting yourself in the middle of something dangerous." Tanya smirked faintly, her confidence unwavering. "Story of my life," she said. "But this isn't just about me. And it's not just about you. The Vipers are expanding, driving families out of their homes, silencing anyone who gets in their way. If you want to make a real difference, you can't just fight them in the shadows. You have to expose them." Hunter exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table. His gaze dropped to the folder, the weight of its contents pressing on him. "You're asking me to trust a stranger and put my life in the hands of a system I don't believe in," he said evenly, his tone tinged with skepticism. "No," Tanya said firmly, leaning slightly forward. "I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. You take down one gang leader, and someone else steps in to fill the void. But if you expose their network, show the world who they are and who's protecting them, you don't just win, you change the game." Hunter's jaw tightened as her words sank in. She wasn't wrong. The fight wasn't just about the men with guns or the leaders giving orders. It was about the system that let them thrive. Still, trusting Tanya, and by extension, the unknown forces behind her, didn't come easy. Finally, Hunter stood, tucking the folder under his arm. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice measured. "That's all I'm asking," Tanya replied, standing as well. "You've got my number. Call me when you're ready." As Hunter stepped out of the diner, Shadow trotting faithfully beside him, Tanya's words echoed in his mind. The fight against the Vipers was growing larger, more dangerous, and now he had a choice to make. Stay in the shadows or step into the light. The faint hum of Hunter's truck engine broke the stillness of the early morning as he parked near the edge of a modest suburban neighborhood. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his sharp eyes scanning the quiet street. Beside Hunter, Tanya's folder lay open, its contents spread across the seat. One name had led him here: Detective James Greer. If Tanya's intel was accurate, Greer was one of the few people working to expose the Black Vipers from within. But the note beside his name, isolated from his department, meant he wasn't exactly the kind of ally Hunter could approach openly. This wasn't just a risk. It was a calculated gamble. Hunter glanced at Shadow, who tilted his head slightly, as if sensing his master's hesitation. "Let's see if this guy's worth the risk," Hunter muttered, stepping out of the truck and closing the door softly behind him. The last 2 days had been spent quietly piecing together Greer's routine. The detective lived in a modest home near the outskirts of the city, keeping a low profile. His life appeared uneventful. Work, occasional late-night drives, and solitary stops at a small diner. Hunter recognized the pattern immediately. It was the behavior of someone trying to stay under the radar while working on something dangerous. Hunter's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't walking into this blind, but it didn't mean it wasn't a risk. The question was whether Greer was a potential ally or just another liability. Hunter wasn't one for surprises, but he knew this meeting couldn't be left to chance. After confirming Detective Greer's usual haunts, Hunter decided to approach him where he might feel most at ease: the diner. When Hunter stepped inside, the diner was nearly empty. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and frying bacon, the soft clatter of plates and distant hum of conversation filling the space. A waitress offered him a polite smile, but he barely acknowledged it, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Near the back, Detective James Greer sat alone at a booth. A cup of coffee rested in one hand, and a small notebook was open in the other. His graying hair and lined face gave him an air of experience and authority, but the faint shadows under his eyes suggested a man running on fumes. Hunter walked over, stopping just short of the table. "Detective Greer?" he asked evenly. Greer glanced up, his sharp eyes narrowing as they scanned Hunter with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Who's asking?" "Hunter Pierce," Hunter said simply. "We need to talk." Greer's posture stiffened slightly, his fingers tightening around the coffee cup. After a pause, he gestured to the seat across from him. "Go ahead." Hunter slid into the booth, his movements deliberate. He pulled a small USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "I've been digging into the Black Vipers," he said. "Your name came up." Greer's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to the drive. "And you decided to track me down? You're not exactly subtle." Hunter ignored the jab. "You've been working on them from the inside, but you're not getting anywhere. Corruption, red tape. Sound familiar?" Greer's lips pressed into a thin line, his expression guarded. He studied Hunter for a long moment before speaking, his tone clipped. "What do you want, Pierce?" Hunter leaned forward slightly, his tone steady and deliberate. "Information. I know where some of their operations are, but you've got details I don't. You want—" "This doesn't have to be complicated." Greer studied him, his sharp gaze scrutinizing every inch of Hunter's expression. "Freedom, huh?" he said finally, his voice edged with skepticism. "You mean no badge, no rules. You're just another vigilante trying to play hero." "I'm not playing anything," Hunter replied evenly. His voice carried a quiet force that cut through the detective's doubt. "And I'm not interested in heroics. This is about shutting them down before they dig in any deeper." Greer leaned back, crossing his arms. His eyes didn't leave Hunter's. "And what happens when they come after you? They don't just let people like you walk away." Hunter's expression remained unchanged, his calm demeanor unwavering. "They've already tried. Didn't work." Greer let the silence hang between them before finally reaching for the USB drive. He turned it over in his hand, his thumb tracing the edges as he considered Hunter's words. "You've done your homework," he admitted. "That's good. But if you think this is just about taking down a gang, you're wrong. The Vipers have ties everywhere. Local politicians, cops, business owners. You cut one head off, and another grows back. Then we cut them all," Hunter said bluntly, his voice cold and resolute. "That's why I need your intel. You've been watching them. You know who's pulling the strings?" Greer hesitated, his brow furrowing as he weighed the risks. Finally, he sighed and pulled out a small, battered notebook, sliding it across the table. "This is what I've got. Locations, connections, names. But if you're serious about this, you'd better be ready for the fallout. They don't just fight back. They burn everything in their path." Hunter opened the notebook, flipping through the pages quickly but carefully. One entry caught his attention. A warehouse just outside of town. The note beside it read, "Supply hub. Rotating shipments. High security." It matched what Tanya had mentioned, a key node in their operation. "This warehouse," Hunter said, tapping the page with his finger. "What do you know about it?" "Enough to know it's worth hitting," Greer replied, "but it's well guarded, and they rotate their shipments on a tight schedule. Miss the window, and you'll be walking into an empty building." Hunter nodded, closing the notebook and tucking it into his jacket. "I'll handle it." Greer leaned forward, lowering his voice as his expression hardened. "One more thing. If you get caught, no one's coming to save you. Not me, not anyone. You're on your own out there." Hunter met Greer's gaze without flinching. "I've always been on my own." Hunter stood, Shadow rising to his feet beside him, ever attentive. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Hunter said quietly, his tone resolute. As he drove away from the diner, the small notebook resting on the seat beside him, Shadow let out a soft bark, breaking the silence. Hunter reached over, his hand briefly brushing the dog's head in reassurance. "We've got what we need," he murmured, his voice calm but firm. "Now it's time to put it to use." The road ahead was cloaked in darkness, but Hunter's path was clear. He knew exactly where he was going and who he was going after. The fading glow of the setting sun bathed the landscape in deep hues of orange and red, as Hunter stood atop a hill overlooking the Black Viper's compound. Through the lens of his binoculars, he scanned the sprawling site, taking in every detail. Shadow lay silently beside him, his sharp gaze fixed on the distant figures moving along the perimeter. This was it, Daryl Kane's stronghold. The intel from Detective Greer and Tanya had painted a bleak picture of the Black Viper's operations, but seeing the compound with his own eyes was sobering. This wasn't a simple gang hideout. It was a fortress. The industrial site had been converted into a highly organized hub for their activities. Rows of shipping containers lined the yard, with some being loaded into waiting trucks. Crates were stacked high under the glow of sweeping spotlights, the constant hum of engines filling the air. "This isn't just a gang," Hunter muttered to Shadow, his voice low. "This is an army." Hunter adjusted his binoculars, focusing on the movements below. The guards were well trained, their patrols precise. He noted their shifts, every 15 minutes, and the variety of weapons slung across their shoulders: automatic rifles, shotguns, and handguns. The main building, a hulking warehouse, loomed at the center of the compound. Its reinforced steel doors and grated windows gave it the appearance of a bunker, but the constant activity suggested something more sinister inside. Suddenly, a convoy of SUVs pulled into the compound, their tires kicking up dust. Hunter's grip on the binoculars tightened as the lead vehicle came to a stop. From the car stepped Daryl Kane, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a sharp suit that starkly contrasted with the dirt and grime of the compound. Kane exuded power and control. His presence commanded immediate attention as a group of men scrambled to follow his orders. Hunter's focus remained unbroken as Kane gestured toward the warehouse, pointing with authority. This was the man pulling the strings, the heart of the Viper's operations. Hunter lowered the binoculars, his jaw tightening. The scale of the operation didn't intimidate him. It only solidified his resolve. "It ends here," he said quietly to Shadow, his voice steady. "One way or another, Kane's voice didn't carry to Hunter's position, but his body language spoke volumes. Every gesture was deliberate, every command clear. He wasn't just overseeing the operation. He was directing its flow with the authority of someone who knew he was untouchable. This wasn't a simple safe house or supply hub. This was the beating heart of the Viper's network. Hunter pulled out the notebook Greer had given him, flipping through its pages as he compared the detective's notes to the activity unfolding before him. The shipments Tanya had traced, guns, drugs, and laundered cash, all passed through this compound. Kane had centralized his operations here, confident no one would dare challenge him on his home turf. Through his scope, Hunter focused on a small security office at the edge of the yard. The faint glow of monitors inside revealed an extensive surveillance setup, likely covering every inch of the compound. Taking out that room would be critical. This wasn't going to be an easy infiltration. Every move would need to be calculated, every step precise. Shadow growled softly beside him, nudging Hunter's arm. The dog's nose twitched, his sharp instincts picking up something Hunter hadn't yet noticed. Hunter trusted Shadow implicitly. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, scanning the area. Moments later, a pair of guards emerged from a nearby building, laughing as they lit cigarettes. They lingered near a parked truck, their conversation casual. Shadow remained tense, his body low to the ground, ready to act if necessary. Hunter smiled faintly. "We'll need their uniforms," he murmured under his breath. As the sky darkened and the compound settled into its nighttime routine, Hunter retreated to a safer position deeper in the woods. He set up a small camp just out of sight, crouching beside Shadow. Methodically, he began cleaning and preparing his gear. His sniper rifle gleamed, oiled and ready, while a compact sidearm was strapped securely to his thigh. Shadow sat patiently, his gaze fixed on Hunter, with quiet attentiveness. "This isn't just another fight," Hunter said quietly, almost to himself. "This is the last one. Kane's the head of the snake. We take him down, and the rest falls apart." Shadow tilted his head, his tail wagging slightly at Hunter's words. A small chuckle escaped Hunter as he reached over to run a hand over the dog's head. "You're ready, aren't you?" "Always are." He pulled out a map of the compound, the one he'd sketched during his reconnaissance, and began marking points of entry and weaknesses he'd identified. The security office would be the first target. Neutralizing the cameras would be essential to maintain the element of surprise. From there, the plan would hinge on infiltrating the warehouse to cut off Kane's escape. Brute force wouldn't work here. Kane had too many men. This mission would require precision, patience, and absolute focus. As he finalized his plan, Hunter's mind briefly drifted to the faces of the families and communities torn apart by the Black Vipers. The fear in their eyes, the empty streets left behind after the gang's intimidation tactics, it fueled his resolve. The compound below wasn't just a hub of illegal activity. It was the source of pain and destruction for so many innocent lives. Shadow let out a quiet bark, snapping Hunter back to the present. The dog's bright eyes reflected unwavering loyalty, his posture steady and ready for action. Hunter nodded, his voice firm. "We're ready." He packed up his gear methodically, his movements deliberate and calm. Every item had its place, and every detail was considered. The fight ahead would be the most dangerous yet, but there was no hesitation in his actions. Fear had no place here, only purpose. Before leaving, Hunter turned back for one last look at the compound through his scope. Inside the warehouse, Daryl Kane stood surrounded by his men. The gang leader exuded confidence, laughing as he inspected a shipment of weapons. The scene was one of power, arrogance, and unchecked control. Hunter's jaw tightened, his focus sharpening. "Tomorrow, Kane," he muttered under his breath. "You'll learn what it feels like to lose." With that, he slipped silently into the woods, Shadow at his side. The faint glow of the compound in the distance was like a beacon, a constant reminder of everything Hunter was determined to destroy. The quiet hum of the forest wrapped around the compound like a living cloak. Hunter Pierce crouched low in the shadows, his sniper rifle resting steadily on a fallen log. Shadow lay beside him, his body pressed to the ground, his keen eyes locked on the distant figures of guards patrolling the perimeter. The compound bustled with activity. The hum of machinery, the faint thud of boots on concrete, and the occasional barked orders breaking the stillness of the night. None of it shook Hunter's focus. Through the scope, Hunter tracked the guards' movements. He counted their rotations, noting every detail. 3 patrolled the north side, 2 lingered near the loading docks, and another pair stood watch at the main entrance. Each guard moved with the ease of someone confident in their security, unaware of the predator watching from the shadows. Hunter murmured softly, "We take them out quietly. No alarms." Shadow let out a faint whine, his posture steady, but his sharp eyes locked on Hunter as if acknowledging the plan. Hunter crouched beside him, giving the dog a reassuring pat before slinging the rifle over his shoulder and pulling out a compact crossbow, silent and deadly. It was the ideal tool for what lay ahead. Hunter moved silently along the tree line, his boots barely making a sound on the soft, damp ground. Shadow led the way, his steps precise, his nose low to the earth as he scouted ahead. The first guard stood beneath a floodlight, his focus fixed on the empty path before him. He didn't see the bolt coming. The projectile struck his neck, and his body crumpled soundlessly. Hunter darted forward, catching the falling man and dragging him into the shadows. He quickly removed the guard's radio, cutting off another potential alarm. Shadow froze a few steps ahead, his ears swiveling toward a faint sound. Following his gaze, Hunter spotted a second guard near the loading dock, lighting a cigarette. The glow of the lighter briefly illuminated his face before he exhaled a plume of smoke. Hunter raised the crossbow again, exhaled slowly, and loosed another bolt. The guard collapsed, without a sound. Methodically, Hunter and Shadow moved around the compound, systematically taking down the guards and severing their lines of communication. Shadow's instincts alerted Hunter to every approaching threat, and Hunter's deadly precision ensured none of them had time to react. The pair worked with chilling efficiency, neutralizing the outer defenses in mere minutes without raising an alarm. Hunter gestured toward the security office, and Shadow darted ahead. The glow of monitors inside the small building illuminated the 2 men stationed there, reviewing camera feeds. One leaned back in his chair, feet propped lazily on the desk, while the other tapped distractedly on a keyboard. Hunter crept to the side of the building, peering through the window as he slid a small signal jammer from his pocket. A single press of a button replaced the camera feeds with static. Inside, the guards reacted with confusion, their shouts filling the room as they scrambled to restore the system. Hunter used the chaos to his advantage. Moving silently, he swung the door open. Shadow leapt first, clamping his powerful jaws onto the arm of the nearest guard and dragging him to the ground. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Hunter was faster, delivering a sharp, precise blow to his temple with the butt of his rifle. Both men were incapacitated before they fully understood what had happened. Hunter worked quickly, disabling the cameras and ensuring the alarm system stayed offline. He tapped Shadow on the head and whispered, "Good work, boy. Let's move." The compound was eerily quiet as Hunter approached the central warehouse. Without their cameras and radios, the gang's usual coordination was in shambles, leaving them disoriented and vulnerable. Moving swiftly and silently, Hunter darted between the shadows, his rifle at the ready, every step bringing him closer to Daryl Kane's stronghold. Shadow froze, his body tense as a low growl rumbled in his throat. Hunter followed his gaze, spotting a pair of armed guards standing by the main doors of the warehouse. Their stances were rigid, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. These men were on high alert, but not alert enough. Hunter raised his rifle, his movements deliberate and silent. A single suppressed shot dropped the first guard where he stood. The second guard's head snapped toward the sound, his hand darting for his weapon. But he didn't get far. Shadow lunged, his powerful frame knocking the man off balance. The guard let out a cry, but it was cut short as Hunter closed the distance, delivering a sharp blow to his jaw that sent him crumpling to the ground. Pushing the doors open, Hunter slipped inside the warehouse, Shadow at his side. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and metal. Crates were stacked high, their labels hastily slapped on. Some were open, revealing rifles, ammunition, and bundles of cash. Workers moved frantically, loading boxes onto a waiting truck. The urgency in their movements told Hunter everything he needed to know. They were preparing to move the operation before it was too late. Hunter moved like a shadow between the towering stacks, taking down the workers one by one. Shadow darted ahead, his growl a precursor to each strike. The workers were no match for the pair's precision. Those who spotted Hunter barely had time to react before they were incapacitated. At the center of the chaos, Daryl Kane stood barking orders, his voice booming over the din. "Get that shipment out of here now! I don't care who's watching. Just move it!" Hunter stepped into the open, his rifle leveled at Kane. "It's over, Kane." Kane turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to fury. "Pierce," he growled, his voice dripping with venom. "I was wondering when you'd finally show your face." The men around Kane hesitated, their confidence wavering as they took in the sight of Hunter, the man who had already dismantled much of their operation. Kane's snarl cut through their hesitation. "What are you waiting for? Kill him!" The guards opened fire, forcing Hunter to dive behind a stack of crates. Bullets tore through the wood and metal, splintering boxes and scattering cash and ammunition across the floor. Hunter moved with practiced precision, returning fire and taking down two men in rapid succession. Shadow weaved through the chaos, targeting another guard, his growls punctuated by the man's panicked screams. Kane began retreating, backing toward a steel staircase at the rear of the warehouse. His gun was drawn, and his voice echoed over the gunfire. "You don't know who you're messing with, Pierce. You think you're a hero? You're nothing." Hunter pressed forward, his steps deliberate and unyielding. His voice carried through the cacophony, calm and resolute. "I'm not a hero, Kane. I'm the reason you're going down." The warehouse rang with the sound of gunfire and shouted orders, but Kane's men were faltering. Hunter's relentless precision and Shadow's ruthless efficiency left little room for resistance. The fight wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned, and Hunter's resolve burned brighter with every step he took toward ending it. The warehouse erupted with chaos as the fight raged on. Gunfire cracked through the cavernous space, punctuated by the clatter of falling crates and the splintering of wood. Shouts and panicked orders blended into a deafening symphony of desperation. Hunter moved like a shadow, darting between cover, his movements fluid and deliberate. Bullets tore through the air around him, splinters and debris raining down, but his focus never wavered. Shadow wove through the confusion, his growls low and menacing. His sharp instincts guided him, darting around attackers with lethal precision. He was a blur of motion, his powerful presence an unrelenting threat to the gang. Hunter's attention was locked on his goal, Daryl Kane. The gang leader had retreated to the upper level of the warehouse, his booming voice barking commands at the few remaining men still willing to fight. The path to him was fraught with danger, but Hunter's resolve was unyielding. This wasn't just about Kane, it was about dismantling the fear and destruction he had unleashed. A sudden shout snapped Hunter's attention to the side. Two guards had spotted Shadow. One raised his rifle, his intent clear. Hunter's heart surged as he quickly lined up his shot. The guard crumpled before he could fire. Shadow lunged at the second man, his jaws clamping onto the guard's arm and dragging him to the ground with a ferocious growl. "Good boy!" Hunter called, his voice sharp but steady. He turned just in time to intercept another attacker closing in from behind. A swift strike with the butt of his rifle sent the man sprawling to the ground. Hunter spared a brief moment to pat Shadow, the silent understanding between them needing no words before pressing forward. Moving methodically, Hunter took down the last few guards. Every shot was precise, every movement deliberate. The gang's confidence was shattered, their organized resistance reduced to panicked desperation. Those who hadn't already fallen to Hunter or Shadow's relentless assault threw down their weapons and fled, leaving the battlefield empty save for its central players. Hunter ascended the steel staircase at the back of the warehouse, his boots ringing out on the metal. Shadow followed close behind, his growl low and steady, his sharp eyes locked on the figure ahead. At the top of the stairs, Daryl Kane stood with his back to a large, grimy window. A pistol gleamed in his hand, and his face was twisted in a sneer. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Pierce?" Kane spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can stop this? You're one man, one dog. You can't change anything." Hunter leveled his rifle at Kane, his voice calm, steady, and cold as ice. "This ends now, Kane. No more families driven out. No more lives destroyed. It's over." Kane laughed bitterly, spreading his arms in mock surrender. "Over? You think taking me out will stop this? You've barely scratched the surface." "Maybe," Hunter said, "but you're not walking away from this." Kane's sneer faltered as he realized Hunter's resolve. He raised his pistol, but Hunter was faster. A single shot rang out, the bullet striking Kane's hand and sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Kane cried out, clutching his bleeding hand as he staggered backward. Suddenly, Kane lunged for the emergency exit door behind him, slamming it open and bolting onto the catwalk outside. Hunter followed without hesitation, Shadow close on his heels. The cold night air hit them as they emerged onto the narrow walkway high above the ground. Kane reached the end of the catwalk and stopped. Trapped, he turned to face Hunter, his face a mask of desperation. "You don't understand, Pierce. This isn't just me. There are people above me, people you'll never touch." Hunter stepped closer, his rifle steady. "Then they'll fall next. But you're done." Kane lunged suddenly, grabbing a loose pipe from the railing and swinging it wildly at Hunter. Hunter dodged, the pipe missing his head by inches. The two men clashed in a brutal fight, their movements desperate and raw. Kane's size gave him an edge in strength, but Hunter's training and precision quickly turned the tide. Just as Hunter gained the upper hand, Kane shoved him toward the edge of the catwalk. The railing groaned under the strain as Hunter teetered precariously. Shadow barked sharply, leaping into action. The dog lunged at Kane, his weight knocking the man backward and breaking his grip on Hunter. Hunter steadied himself and grabbed Kane before he could fall off the edge. With a powerful shove, he slammed Kane against the railing, pinning him there. "It's over, Kane," Hunter growled, his voice low and unrelenting. Kane struggled, his strength fading. "You think you've won?" Hunter didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed a pair of zip ties from his pocket and secured Kane's hands behind his back. Shadow stood at his side, his growl silencing any remaining defiance from the defeated man. Hunter hauled Kane back into the warehouse, the man's weight dragging against him. The remaining guards were gone, the compound eerily silent except for the faint hum of distant machinery. Shadow trotted ahead, his tail wagging slightly as he sniffed the air for any lingering threats. Hunter dropped Kane unceremoniously onto the floor, his breath steady, despite the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his voice calm but firm. "It's done. I've got him." As sirens began to wail in the distance, Hunter looked down at Kane, who sat slumped against a crate, his face twisted in anger and defeat. Shadow stood beside Hunter, his posture tall and proud. "You'll never stop all of us," Kane muttered, his voice bitter. Hunter crouched down, his eyes locked on Kane's. "You're right, but I'll make damn sure no one forgets what you've done." As the first squad cars pulled into the compound, their lights flashing against the darkness, Hunter stepped back, his focus already shifting to the next fight. Kane was finished, but the road to justice was far from over. The cold light of dawn crept across the warehouse compound as the flashing red and blue lights of police cars painted the scene in stark, surreal hues. Officers swarmed the area, securing the perimeter and rounding up the remaining gang members who had tried to flee. Daryl Kane sat slumped against a crate, his wrists bound and his face a mask of defeat. Shadow stood beside Hunter Pierce, his tail wagging slightly as if sensing the victory at hand. Hunter watched silently as Detective James Greer approached, flanked by two uniformed officers. Greer's eyes flicked to Kane, then to Hunter, his expression unreadable. "Hell of a mess you made here," Greer said, his voice low, "but it's over. We've got him." Hunter nodded, his jaw tight. "You've got more than just him. The evidence is in the warehouse. Guns, drugs, cash, records, it's all there." Greer gestured for the officers to move inside, then turned back to Hunter. "That's a start, but you and I both know this doesn't stop with Kane. There are people above him, people who'll try to bury this if they get the chance." Hunter reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive, handing it to Greer. "They won't. This has everything. Names, bank transfers, communications, proof of their network and everyone tied to it. Cops, politicians, business owners, it's all there." Greer took the drive, his fingers curling around it tightly. "You sure about this? Once this gets out, there's no going back." "I wasn't planning on going back," Hunter said flatly. Greer nodded and tucked the drive into his pocket. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." Hunter's gaze sharpened. "Not just to your department. Send it to the media, too. National outlets. The more eyes on this, the harder it'll be for anyone to cover it up." Greer hesitated, then sighed. "You've got a point. I'll loop in a few journalists I trust. If this blows up, it'll blow big." Hunter glanced back at the warehouse, the weight of the past few days settling over him. "That's the idea." Shadow let out a low bark, drawing Hunter's attention. The dog's ears were pricked, his eyes locked on Kane, who was muttering curses under his breath as officers prepared to transport him. "You think this changes anything?" Kane spat, his voice dripping with venom. "There's always someone else ready to take over. You can't stop us." Hunter approached, his steps deliberate, and his gaze icy. He crouched down so that he was at eye level with Kane. "You're right. There will always be someone else, but they won't be you. And they won't have this network to protect them. You built your empire on fear, and now it's crumbling." Kane sneered, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Hunter stood, his presence towering over the broken man. "You're done." As Kane was loaded into the back of a police van, Hunter stepped away from the scene, pulling out his phone. Tanya Walker's number was already dialed, and she picked up after the first ring. "Hunter," she said, her tone sharp. "I saw the news. Kane's in custody?" "He is," Hunter confirmed. "Greer's got the evidence, but I need you to make sure it goes wide. Every outlet you've got, every contact you trust. This needs to be too big to bury." Tanya exhaled sharply, the sound of her typing audible through the phone. "I'm on it." "You're sure the evidence is airtight? Every name, every transaction, every connection?" Hunter said. "It's all there." Tanya's voice softened. "You did it, Hunter. You brought them down." "It's not just me," Hunter replied, glancing at Shadow, who was watching him intently. "But this isn't over. There's still fallout coming." "Let me handle the media," Tanya said firmly. "You've done your part. It's time to let the system work." Hours later, national headlines exploded with the news. Gang leader Daryl Kane arrested in major raid. Evidence links Black Vipers to political corruption. And local detective exposes network of organized crime. News outlets ran footage of the raid, interviews with witnesses, and snippets of the damning evidence Hunter and Greer had uncovered. Greer's department faced public scrutiny, forcing corrupt officers to resign or face charges. Politicians named in the documents scrambled to deny their involvement, but the evidence was too clear. The Black Vipers network was in shambles, their operations dismantled piece by piece. From a distance, Hunter watched it all unfold. He kept a low profile, staying off the radar as the storm raged. Shadow sat beside him on a quiet hill overlooking the city, his tail wagging as Hunter scratched behind his ears. "You think they'll get it right this time, boy?" Hunter murmured. Shadow tilted his head, his steady gaze a silent reassurance. Hunter exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of peace, not because the fight was over, but because he'd done what he could. The rest was out of his hands. "Come on," he said, standing. "We've got a long road ahead." Shadow barked once, trotting beside him as they disappeared into the forest. The evening air was crisp as Hunter Pierce walked along a dirt trail winding through the forest, Shadow at his side. The chaos of the past weeks felt like a distant memory, though its echoes lingered in the headlines and the public outcry that followed the exposure of the Black Viper's operations. Daryl Kane was in custody, and the evidence Hunter, Detective Greer, and Tanya had pushed into the spotlight ensured the gang's influence was shattered beyond repair. For the first time in what felt like years, the weight pressing on Hunter's shoulders had eased, but the scars of the fight, the ones visible and those buried deeper, remained. Hunter stopped at the edge of a clearing, the glow of the city visible in the distance. He crouched, running a hand over Shadow's head. "We did it, boy," he murmured. Shadow wagged his tail, his eyes bright and trusting. The news had been relentless since Kane's arrest. Footage of the raid, interviews with the families Kane's gang had terrorized, and updates on the fallout from the evidence dominated the airwaves. Tanya had delivered on her promise to ensure the story reached national attention, and Greer's quiet persistence within his department had forced accountability where it was most needed. Hunter had stayed out of sight, content to let others take the credit. He didn't need recognition, and he certainly didn't want the attention. His work was never about glory. It was about making things right. As Hunter rose, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered without hesitation. "Walker." Tanya's voice was warm, though tinged with exhaustion. "I figured you'd be out in the middle of nowhere by now." "Close enough," Hunter replied. "What's the latest?" "They're unraveling fast," Tanya said. "Kane's lawyers are scrambling, but the evidence is too solid. Most of his lieutenants have flipped to save themselves, and a few of the names in the documents are already stepping down. The press is eating it up. And Greer, he's doing fine," Tanya said. "He wanted me to tell you thanks for trusting him." Hunter nodded to himself. "He earned it." Tanya hesitated, then added, "What about you? You're the one who made all this happen. Don't you want to see it through?" "I've seen enough," Hunter said simply. "It's not my world anymore." "Fair enough," Tanya replied. "But for what it's worth, you made a difference. People know what the Vipers did. They know who to hold accountable now." "That was the point," Hunter said, his tone firm but quiet. "Take care, Walker." "You too, Pierce," Tanya said before the line went dead. Hunter pocketed the phone and turned back to Shadow, who was sniffing at the edge of the trail. The dog's unwavering presence had been a lifeline through it all, a reminder that no matter how dark things got, there was always loyalty, always trust. "You ready to head home?" Hunter asked. Shadow barked once, his tail wagging enthusiastically. Hunter smiled faintly, his steps steady, as he led the way back down the trail. Home wasn't a place so much as a sense of purpose, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he'd found it. In the city below, the world was already changing. News anchors continued to dissect the implications of Kane's arrest and the collapse of the Black Viper's network. Families who had been forced out of their homes were beginning to rebuild, their courage bolstered by the knowledge that justice had finally been served. Detective Greer, now regarded as a hero within his department, was leading efforts to clean up the remaining corruption. Tanya Walker, riding the wave of her reporting, had become a beacon for those seeking to expose the rot hiding in plain sight. Their lives moved forward, shaped by the battles they had fought. For Hunter, the fight was over, but his journey wasn't. There would always be another Daryl Kane, another network preying on the vulnerable, but for now, he could rest, knowing he had done his part to make the world a little less dark. As he and Shadow reached his truck, parked under the sprawling branches of an old oak tree, Hunter opened the door and gestured for Shadow to jump in. The dog hopped up eagerly, settling into the passenger seat. Hunter paused, taking one last look at the forest trail behind him. The weight of the past weeks hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had lessened, leaving room for something else: hope. Climbing into the driver's seat, Hunter started the engine, the familiar rumble grounding him. Shadow leaned against him, and Hunter gave the dog a quick pat before pulling onto the road. "Let's see where the road takes us," Hunter said quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Shadow barked in agreement, his tail wagging as the truck disappeared into the morning light. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.